I'm Richard Taylor from the Philosophy Department at Marquette University, together with my colleague Andrea Robilio at the Catholic University in Leuven. We present to you this course on Thomas Aquinas on Metaphysics. This is video 12A. I believe there will not be a 12B since I think we can cover everything very well in just about 35 minutes. So I'll proceed here. The commentary on De Omnibus chapter 3 is our topic, but I want to go back first to chapter 2. Last week we saw Aquinas make careful distinctions in the use of esse and id quod est, weaving his way through various meanings of these terms to denote metaphysical notions. And you'll recall that I did say something about Aquinas here dealing with issues of language, meaning, and also precise explication of the reference of these various terms. And so esse can denote various things, and so can id quod est. Now, in some of the cases, the metaphysical notions did not exist in their own right as such, the ones we discussed last week. And here I refer to his discussion of ipsum esse, or being itself, in its relation to id quod est, that is the essence of a thing. Pardon me. The term ipsum esse can be used to denote three different things here. It can denote being itself considered as prior to its realization in an individual essence. It can be being itself as realized in an essence. And ipsum esse can be being itself as subsisting in its own right as God. So there's equivocal use of terms here. They're certainly related, but the terms have to be distinguished very carefully to follow the arguments of Aquinas. And we already saw that. So in this case, we have three phrases, and I propose to describe them in terms of the account of Proclus and his Elements of Theology, proposition 23, which I mentioned in the last video, I believe. Ipsum esse sub 1 here is God, that is, as God is being itself, as unparticipated. And I use the term unparticipated following Proclus here because nothing shares in the very nature of divine being as such. There may be ways of sharing through efficient causality or other considerations, but nothing shares the unparticipated being of God as such. Nothing participates in the very essence of God as divine being. Ipsum esse sub 2, as the participated perfection of being, is being itself prior to its presence in the thing to which it gives the actuality of being. Now let me note, in terms of efficient causality, God does not create being itself and then pause for a moment and then stick it inside some pre-existing essence. Of course not. These are considerations about priority and posteriority in the nature of things. Being itself is prior to that which it actualizes in being, but that which it actualizes in being is the essence which does not yet exist. And being itself does not yet exist until it is instantiated in that essence. I refer here to then being ipsum esse sub 2 as the participated perfection of being prior to its presence in the thing to which it gives the actuality of being. Ipsum esse sub 3 is being itself received in id quod est, received in the existing entity, that is, received in the participant. So we have unparticipated, participated perfection, and participant. And that's exactly what Proclus distinguishes in proposition 23 of his Elements of Theology. And I think it's helpful here to have that in mind. These are different ways of understanding the nature of participation, and while Aquinas did not have that text early in his life, by the end of his life he had the entire Elements of Theology of Proclus translated by William of Moerbeke. And once he had that in hand, Aquinas was the first one to announce that the Liber de Causis is in fact based on Proclus. Probably the first to know this to be the case, of course, was William of Moerbeke, who chose to translate the Elements of Theology of Proclus. And surely what's relevant there is that, in fact, Moerbeke, as trained in philosophy, had already read the Liber de Causis, since it was required reading material. Anyway, let's go on. Let's carry on with chapter 2 then. So you'll recall that Aquinas then used the argument from simplicity to reason to the unique character of God, that is, the unique character of ipsum esse. Sub 1. Quote, but that alone will be truly simple which does not participate in to be, not in hearing, in fact, but subsisting. This, however, can be but one. For if it be itself, if to be itself has nothing else admixed other than that which is to be, as has been said, it is impossible that this to be itself be multiplied through anything diversifying it. That is, there can't be multiple perfect instances of being itself. Carry on. And because it has nothing outside itself conjoined, it follows that it is susceptible of no accident. So being itself doesn't receive anything from outside. It has nothing to conjoin itself to it. So this simple, one, and sublime is God himself, writes Aquinas. Now, with that established, Aquinas proceeded to address the issue of diversity, its discordance and similitude, following the dense text of Boethius quite carefully. Boethius does not make it easy to see what he intends, but looking ahead to chapter 3, we can see that here, at the end of chapter 2, he's setting up the argument that's going to follow. What's the key here? It's key that everything seeks its like. To seek is to have an appetite for or to desire something, and appetite and desire are for a good. Now, I'm paraphrasing Aquinas in the account of the arguments and putting it in my own words, but this is the way the reasoning is moving in his account. With that established, then, Aquinas proceeded to address the issue of diversity, its discordance, and similitude, again following the text of Boethius very carefully. Boethius, however, does not make it easy, as I said. And he's looking ahead to 3, as I also said. So the key here, I seem to be repeating myself somewhat, but another key here is also that everything seeks its like. The term was used, similitude. To seek is to have appetite for and to desire something. Appetite and desire are for a good which fulfills and completes, that is, it perfects. So if everything has an appetite, and that appetite is for a good, and it's seeking something similar, you see what follows. It must be good itself, because it's seeking out something good. It would not seek out the good were it not a likeness itself of the good. So good must be present in each thing in some way. How, that is yet to be determined. So, but if things seek, as I say, I repeat myself now, but if things seek and desire something, and this is a seeking after a good, something good for it, then there must be some good in things, and this is because things seek their like. So that was the whole setup at the end of chapter 2, setting up the issue of whether a thing is good by participation or a thing is good by substance, which will be taken up in chapter 3. There is then some good in things. They must have, quote, a natural inclination toward that which it seeks. That inclination sometimes follows the very essence of a reality in accord with the intelligible structure of its essential form. And of course, in the Aristotelian tradition, form gives being to something, and insofar as a thing is and has a form, it seeks the perfection of that form, has a natural inclination toward its fulfillment, and of course, that is the good for the thing. Quote, but sometimes, quote, sometimes it follows the nature of some supervenient form. For instance, when someone possesses an acquired habit, he desires that which suits him in accord with that habit, close quote. Now this reasoning then establishes that there must be some good in things, and sets up the analysis of the question of whether this good in things is making them good by participation, or they have it, that namely good, by their very own substances. And finally, this then brings us to chapter 3. After his usual situating of the text in its setting, that is his divisio textus, Aquinas proceeds to address the issue, stating clearly the premise to be tested by the yardstick of 1. Substance and 2. Participation. The premise is this, quote, we presuppose that all things are good, close quote. So, if we can have a coherent account of that by substance, or a coherent account of that by participation, then we'll be able to explain how it is that all the things that are good. Namely, we will be in accord with our presupposition. But again, let's then review the preliminary considerations. Certainly, everything tends to its like, as we've already seen, as something commonly known to the learned. And our witness is Aristotle himself, says Aquinas, who in the Nicomachean Ethics indicates that the wise understand the good to be that which all things seek. In fact, asserts Aquinas, not only is the good what everything with appetite seeks, there is some appetite in all things for the good. So there's a certain built-in teleology in all that is. It seeks the good and the fulfillment of itself insofar as it is what it is. It seeks the fulfillment of its form, no matter what the thing is. That's a broader statement than it usually is used with regard to appetite, of course. It's going to be used in a metaphorical fashion then, but it's an assertion of teleology in all that is. But how are things good? Either substantially, that is through essence, or by participation. Yet Aquinas will follow Boethius and reject both these ways, of course, as you know from your readings. These two are opposites, so it cannot be in both ways. Now, as for participation, we've already noted that there is the mode of participation of subject in an accident. The white cloth participates whiteness, my example, and the mode of participation of species in genus. Human participates in animal. Quote, here, pardon me. Here, however, Boethius speaks according to the mode of participation, writes Aquinas, by which a subject participates in an accident, and therefore he divides as opposites that which is predicated substantially and that predicated by participation, as is clear through the examples which he subsequently introduces. All right, so that's the setup then. Then he's talking about these two kinds, and he divides these two kinds of participation as opposites, and incompatible. Will one of them be the right one? Well, we know already that Aquinas will say that they're both wrong ways of conceiving participation in this case. But if good by participation in this way, then things cannot be good in themselves, but only accidentally so, if we mean by through themselves what is through their very definition. That's what we mean by through themselves and through their very definition. This is because, quote, what is posited in the definition of anything pertains to its essence, and thus is not predicated of it through the participation of which we are now speaking. All right, so it's not the same kind of participation. So understood in this way, if things are good by participation, then we have to conclude that they are good in themselves, that they are in themselves in no way good, when taken just in themselves. If it's only through the participation of something exterior, then in themselves they are not good, but they take on an accidental characteristic by participating in the way of an accident. In that sense, they are not good in themselves, but that contradicts our presumption in this. Quote, therefore, if beings are good through participation, it follows that they are not good through themselves, that is, through their own substance, writes Aquinas. From this it follows, therefore, that the substances of beings do not tend to goods, the contrary of which has been conceded above, namely, that all things do tend to good. It seems, therefore, that beings are good not through participation, but through their substance. So we reject the first possibility of being through participation, and so this route of participation is rejected. So what about the route of substance? The route of substantial goodness, as explained by Boethius, also has to be rejected. As Aquinas notes, the way Boethius has set up the reasoning, to be something is to be it essentially. Quote, as to those things whose substance is good, it is necessary that they be good according to that itself which they are. And so, quote, it follows, therefore, that of those things that are good according to substance, being itself is good. Now, that has implications. From this, it follows then that the very being of things is good. The very being of things is good. And so also then that, quote, those things that are, inasmuch as they are good, namely, in such a way that to be and to be good are the same for each thing. So there's an identity of being and goodness in this, if they're to be substantially good. There must be a perfect and complete identity of being and goodness on this reasoning. Since they're good in their being, then each and every one of them is then unparticipated goodness, which is nothing other than God. And this is clearly unacceptable. Quote, then Aquinas writes, he says that if the being itself of all things were good, since this would entail that they are substantial goods, the result is that they are all as well similar to the first good, not just similar, but identical, similar to the first good, which is the substantial good, and he for whom to be and to be good are the same, close quote. Hence, all things are the first good itself. And, quote, if all things are the first good itself, since the first good itself is nothing other than God, it follows that all beings would be God, which even to say is wicked, writes Aquinas. Okay, so we have pantheism. Since that's unacceptable, then the reasoning leading to it is also unacceptable, and so things are not substantially good, as Boethius would have it here in this argumentation. So the reasoning thus far has yielded that beings are neither good by participation nor by substance, and so, writes Aquinas, it seems that it can be further concluded that in no way would beings be good, which is opposed to what was set down above. Close quote. Now, these issues here in Chapter 3 are left unresolved, except to say that two ways of approaching the issue are rejected. The resolution to the issues will come in Chapters 4 and 5, and that will be our topic for next week. I note also here that next week will be the last student presentation, and that the lectures by Professor Robilio will begin on Thanksgiving, and on that Thursday of Thanksgiving, and we'll have a slightly different format then at that time. So let this be enough now for concluding Aquinas Metaphysics video 12a, and we are done.